Publication is a social construct. In modern parlance, it's about making a work available for commercial distribution or sale. But in the strictly etymological sense, publication is the process of making a discourse accessible or public to people. In both in antiquity and in modernity, there are numerous ways that discourses can be made available. Publication constructs differ between social contexts and for different media forms. In our own context, monographs, textbooks, magazines, press releases, blog posts, emails, and tweets are all written texts that are made public, are published in different ways. For some of these media, publication is officious and finalized. For others, it's not. Some communication media are editable and retractable. Others are less so. The medium impacts the circulation of the message. While publication practices in Greco-Roman antiquity differ from modern practices, there are similarities in their fundamental natures. In both contexts, publication is a social initiative by which a text becomes available to persons who did not produce it. Just as publication processes vary for modern media, so also did they vary for antique and New Testament media. This here is how I visualize Raymond J. Starr's model of circulating text in Greco-Roman antiquity. It's celebrated in both classical studies and also in biblical studies. Starr proposes that, quote, Romans circulated texts in a series of widening concentric circles determined primarily by friendships. So the innermost circles with solid lines on my graph here represent the physical creation and the distribution of texts, as well as making them known to friends through recitations. The various notches along the line indicate a text stop along the way to publication. Starr's model here is largely based on the testimony from Pliny the Elder, especially as we find it in Epistle or Letter 7, but Pliny also talks about his process in other letters. In this letter, Pliny's defending his practice of giving readings of speeches that he first delivered orally without the text present at all. That is, he wrote the speech down, this is stage 1, delivered it without the physical text present, then gave a reading of the speech with the text present. This would be stage 3. He made his revisions and then published the text. Publication for Pliny is textual, not oral. So he gives tellings and he gives speeches, but the ultimate making public of the text is doing it in textual form, handing the writing over. Pliny's remarks and Starr's model both represent ideal circumstances. There's no reason for us to doubt Pliny's description of his circulation and revision practices. I believe that we should listen to people and believe them when they say what they say, but his comments shouldn't be taken as prescriptive for every single discourse that Pliny made public, nor should we take it as prescriptive for all authors in Greco-Roman antiquity. In this video, what I want to do is complexify Starr's publication model based on the media myth that I attempt to redress in Chapter 7 of my book, Gospel Media. Starr's concentric circles model doesn't apply equally to every kind of text, every kind of medium, or every reading community. Different media are circulated in different kinds of ways. So I will employ Starr's model as a heuristic, but we'll see that there are several different ways that text got out there, that text circulated, and that Pliny's model that Starr uses reflect ideal publication practices. Accidental publication is a term with which Matthew Larson problematizes the clean, idealized process of making a text public. With accidental publication, the author creates a preliminary version of a discourse, but never releases it publicly. Someone else leaks the text from them or for them. With accidental publication, stage 4 in this concentric circles model is skipped altogether, and stages 2 and 3 might be as well. Cicero attests to this kind of accidental publication in 2 letters to his good friend Atticus. In the letters, he remarks on a speech that he composed in a fit of anger. He never actually offered the speech orally. He just wrote it up, never actually gave it, but he must have handed over a text of it to a few friends. He says in the letter that he suppressed it and never expected it to leak out, but it did, and portions of it are still available. You can still read portions of this angry letter or this angry speech that Cicero never actually delivered. Something similar happened with Diodorus Siculus's Library of History. Preliminary sections of this discourse were pirated and published, as he says it, before they were in their final form. We see that this trope repeats itself with several other authors. An author named Arrian writes in the preface to Epictetus the Philosopher's Discourses that he textualized this teaching, but didn't know how that spilled out to others, how it leaked out. The physician Galen, who we've had opportunity to look at often, frequently states in a discourse called On My Own Books that he wrote texts for his students or for himself that he didn't intend to publish. These were private texts. Galen intentionally textualized the discourse. He meant to write them down or have writings of them made, but he only meant to circulate them within the network of his students. Somehow or other, these written discourses leaked out, fell into other persons' hands, and were made public. Sometimes this was in Galen's name, and sometimes it was not. Galen indicates that many texts made their way back to him for correction. He then properly completed them and gave them titles. In these cases, the discourse is written by its author, moves to the inner circle in Starr's model as it's offered to students, leaks out and jumps out to the outer public circle, then is brought back into the author's inner circle for revision, and again jumps to the outer circle with proper attribution to its author. On other occasions, we find an author's speech was textualized, but it never came back in for revisions. This resulted in the existence of multiple unauthorized versions of a text. These are occasions of uncontrolled textualization, in which a text is created, but the author wasn't involved in the writing or revision process. This situation is addressed by the philosopher Quintilian, the rhetorician Quintilian, I should say, in the Orator's Education. Quintilian dismisses speeches that are circulating in his name, but have very little of him in them on account of, as he says it, the negligence of the shorthand writers who took them down from the oral situation to make money. Quintilian doesn't intend to supplant these particular unauthorized speeches with revised authorized version. He simply leaves them be to exist textually. If an author subsequently textualized and published a discourse that was prematurely released or was textualized without their oversight, competing versions of the same discourse might result. For instance, Cicero gave a speech in defense of a man named Milo. The speech as it was delivered orally was not successful in its defense of Milo, and it is known to be a very ineloquent speech. That speech was textualized, but not by Cicero. A different authorized version was then later created by Cicero, and two different versions of the speech resulted. One was the bumbling speech as Cicero delivered it and someone took down from the oral situation, and the other was what Cicero composed in writing, and as he says, with such consummate skill that it might be reckoned his finest. The latter one, the good one, is the preferred authorized version for Cicero. Quintilian states that two pre-publication versions of the Orator's Education circulated alongside his official version. Both of the unauthorized were textualized from oral events, from teaching situations, but Quintilian wasn't in control of their revision or circulation. The discourse existed in multiple different forms, even though each text had the same originating oral event. An author ran the risk of losing control of their discourse whenever they placed a physical instantiation of it into the hands of another person. If a text leaked, it was normally from the inner circles in Starr's model. For this reason, authors were sometimes reluctant to share their pre-published materials. For example, Pliny writes a letter to encourage his friend Rufus to publish his poems. He writes of his hesitation to share materials with Spurinna, but Pliny does so, he shares these materials once he's assured that his friend Spurinna will keep them private. The author Horace writes that something written should enter into the ears, not the eyes, of a select few, and then the parchment be hidden away in a closet. This is because, as Horace puts it, what you have not published you can destroy. The written word, once sent forth, can never come back. Once you make a physical version, it's a lot harder to bring it back in. Though some authors did try to. If a text was suppressed, it was left to die with trusted confidants or friends, represented by the open circle here. But once a text moved beyond stage 3, the author ceded any illusion of control that they had. The line between stages 3 and 4 in Starr's model represents the moment of publication, or in Greek, ekdosis. Publication was the intentional act of making a discourse available to an audience that was both wide and was not limited. Authors make a distinction between texts that are prepared for publication and those that are either not yet ready for publication or weren't textualized for the purpose of publication at all. Some texts are created with no thought that they will ever be copied by others. The author is not looking beyond stages 1, 2, or 3 in Starr's circulation model. Other texts are produced with uncertainty about their publication, and still other texts are created from the outset with an eye to an open public readership in the outer circles of the model. Preparing a text for publication is thus about the social intention and imagining a wide readership for the text with whom the author may not be familiar. The distinction between texts for publication and not for publication is especially acute in Galen's writings. His private texts that were circulated in a limited manner to students and disreputably used by persons not named Galen were, as Galen himself tells us, explicitly not for publication. And that's a technical term, sort of a phrase, a label that he will apply to certain texts. The texts were plagiarized because they were of a certain medium. They were notes, in Greek this is hupanemata, that were either taken down by someone else from that oral event, or they were written by Galen himself, but for a limited audience, for just Galen or for Galen and his students. The term notes can refer to many different things in the ancient context. Reminders, memoirs, memoranda, records, drafts, texts, copies, and materials are all other possible connotations of the word. This is because the word notes is more categorical than it is descriptive. There were different kinds and different forms of notes in the ancient world. And not for publication was one of the essential characteristics of this category of text, this media. This kind of text, notes, was not produced with the intention that it would be made widely available, at least not initially. Notes are not publication media. Compositions, syngrammata in Greek, in contrast, are publication media. Galen makes a distinction between notes and compositions, associating only the latter with intentional publication. This was true for his text and the text upon which he remarks. When he comments on obscure passages in Hippocrates, from where we get the Hippocratic Oath, so another physician that is much older and earlier than Galen, Galen explains why these passages are obscure on the basis of their medium and their publication purview. If a text is note-like, this is the sort of adjectival form of notes, or hyponematic, to give it a fancy term, it's not intended for publication. And so this is what we see in Epidemics 6:325. It's no wonder that the support and even the whole account, the whole argument has been left out, for this document isn't a composition created for publication, but it's more like drafts or outlines, notes, which we would make for ourselves. Then in 631, Galen explains, but the text is unclear to us. As I've already said several times, this book was not written for publication, but as an outline sketch and a draft, a note for Hippocrates himself. If he were writing for publication, he would have said everything he needed to say. And then also in book 2 of the Epidemics, Galen says that this book was like notes, not like a composition, and that the document was written as certain notes for Hippocrates, not a composition. Texts that were notes and were not compositions looked and read differently than those that were. Notes were more obscure. They were taken down from oral events. Oftentimes, they retained that oral style from the oral event. Lucian says that they were, quote, without beauty or continuity. They resembled what a soldier or a craftsman might put together as a diary of the army's daily events, largely written in what he calls street corner talk. Notes and other texts that are not for publication might exist in a variety of different physical forms. A text prepared for publication, in contrast, in the first century world, was expected to be created as a clean presentation copy in a book roll or a scroll, the medium that is appropriate for literature. Texts that were not for publication were never meant to move beyond the first 3 stages in Starr's model. They were for private use for the limited audience and oftentimes existed in a notebook or codex